take away that burden on the rep of like, please go in and do your CRM hygiene on Friday, which no one likes, or on Sunday before the Monday forecast call, make sure your ducks in a row so you don't get yelled at, which is bad for both worlds because you don't have a strategic conversation about your deals and where you can win and the barriers you need to knock down or where people can invest or problem solving. The goal here is that the CRM becomes much more ambient, and again, momentum has proved this, that you just go auto update. It's auto run. So if you are trapping all those conversations and you process them in the right way, you're going to auto fill the CRM.
All right, well, welcome everyone to the Stack GTM podcast series on Agentic Sales, brought to you by the GTM Council. I'm Noah Marks, here with my co-host Andy Mowat. As a reminder, the Stack GTM podcast is where we tackle all emerging AI trends in go-to-market from the perspectives of the practitioners and the companies themselves. Our guest today is Chief Customer Officer at Agentforce, and has been heavily involved in all things Salesforce analytics for a better part of a decade, and also had a stint running products over at a company called Clary. Welcome to the podcast, Phil Cooper.
Thank you, Noah. Great to be here and good to meet you, Andy.
So let's start it off. So Chief Customer Officer, I want to ask about Agentforce, but what's your role as Chief Customer Officer?
So my focus is very much on the sales persona and that business. So the artist formerly known as Sales Cloud, now Agentforce Sales, which obviously has undergone a pretty big transformation with this kind of agentic era, and that's hence the rename, which applies to all our cloud products. So I'm focused on a few things. Number one on my list is really being that kind of catalyst for customers to adopt, understand where this thing is going, and that's a bidirectional conversation on obviously. But to try and accelerate both our field and our partners' awareness of what we're doing in the product team, and then bring back what our customers demand, which is, I spend a lot of time outside Silicon Valley, talking to Main Street businesses across a lot of different verticals, and I think it's valuable to bring that to the product team, the product leadership, who do some of that, but also, there's a lot of pressure to play in our domain and work with similar companies. So I try and bring that kind of perspective from manufacturers and life science companies and insurers and all across.
Well, there's a whole business, a whole world outside of the tech bubbles. Very, very important to get.
There is. Yes, there is.
Yeah.
It keeps,
but no, that's important.
Going.
That's a good distinction. So then, so Agentforce then has the permutations: Agentforce for sales, Agentforce for service. Is that correct? Tell me how Agentforce, because again, I won't key in on the Einstein stuff from the past, but Salesforce has a unique way of repositioning and renaming products. Okay, so good. Yeah.
We like keeping everyone on their toes. I think of it as a new capability layer, right? So Agentforce is a horizontal capability layer that has that reasoning piece, allows you to build, manage, deploy, monitor, observe your agents, and it kind of lights up each of the clouds. So each of the clouds, whether that's commerce or in this case, we're going to talk about sales, but service, marketing, analytics across the board are all building and consuming agentic capabilities and putting them into their workflows. And so Agentforce is this kind of back-end layer almost that extends the original deterministic platform, right, that everyone knows and loves, I think. So on top of the CRM, that's its role for me. And it's big enough in terms of that shift that we touched on, that Benioff decided to rename everything, which is, I think he was right. I think there's a pretty big transformation from legacy, rules-based, process-oriented selling to where we're going with agents.
I would agree. I've been on the Salesforce ecosystem my entire career, and it's like every time they pull out a new thing, I'm like, I think I could just describe it that way. Do you also get into the I guess what I would call the classic Salesforce way? That announcement around headless, I think got a lot of us perked our ears up, right? Because we've all said, hey, the fundamental foundations of Salesforce, which is the security, the architecture, the ability to move, to change things, and to really have the controls is powerful. I'd be curious, does the headless fall into the Agentforce side of the world in your view, Phil, or into the Sales Cloud? Again, I'm probably not using the right terminology, but
Yeah, again, I'd put it another layer above that because it really impacts every cloud when you think about how you deliver a user experience to your end user, and in fact, who that user is, whether they're even are they a human or an agent. So if we think about the world of humans for the moment, if we narrow this down to sales, we've been trying to do this for a while, that we want to bring the experiences to the seller where they want to
yeah,
work. And that increasingly has been for us Slack, but it could also be Teams, or it could be Claude or OpenAI, a chat experience, or it could be completely headless behind the scenes. So it could be equally an agent consuming these data and services from another provider, right? Or something you've built yourself. So I think about it as an extension of what we always did, which was build API first, to say, no, our agents and workflows are also exposed as MCP for an agent to consume, and as APIs and as command line interface. So it really, I think it's a continuation and acceleration of that original strategy, which was always said we want to be open and allow you to plug in the right ways into your organization. And and an anecdote, I was talking to a customer about this a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me, they said, how many integrations do you think we have off the CRM that live on top of your account data, your leads, your core, what I think of as hero objects in your CRM? And I was like, oh, is it 2 or 3 dozen or something like that? Quite a large company. And they said, no, 396. And so it deeply kind of integrated into the enterprise as source of truth. And it's not just there that I don't think it's just the data. It's also the workflow and, importantly, the intelligence that you can build on top of that when really broad CRM data, not just traditional structured CRM data that we know and love, but what's the surround sound of all the engagement? What's the presence on your marketing, from a marketing standpoint on your website? What's your engagements with a person, whether they're giving you information via a meeting or, an in-person meeting or a web meeting? Capturing all of that context is what we do. And so I think about the CRM very broadly there, exposing all of that, but the built-in intelligence on top of it. Both to our first party experiences, which don't go away, but exposing it to our agents, but then any agent you choose to build. So if you start to string those things together for a go-to-market workflow, that you can run off the same source of truth, basically.
how do you
That's the
think
way I think
about?
about it.
I mean, obviously CRM was the original kind of source of truth, and then we ended up with calls, and we ended up
Hmm.
with product data, and we ended up with email. I know you guys obviously bought Momentum that kind of feeds in there and solves pieces of it. But if a company is building agents, there's been a lot of work, discussion in the last couple months around the semantic layer or that context layer that's on top of that.
Hmm.
Am I building? Are you providing the semantic context layer as well too, or do I still need to have a data warehouse to be able to build agents intelligently? Like, how do you think the ideal stack for a Salesforce customer should look in an agent first world?
Maybe we should break those
Yeah.
pieces down, because I do think it varies depending on your situation and what your business is like and what you are measuring. But I totally agree. The data foundation on top of structured CRM data is absolutely vital.
Me too.
So I think of it as required capability. You need, in order to do something like prospecting, you need to be able to go and look back and understand what your engagements were a year ago. What did you talk about?
Mhm.
What did that prospect tell you about their business, maybe about their family and what they thought of the World Cup game, but more importantly, what's going on in their business is important to them. And instead of relying on trying to buy that data from data brokers, which is fine, you might get some useful enrichment from there, but we're kind of being told this in thousands of conversations. And we've done it historically. I'd say, go to market teams have done a horrible job of leveraging that. That's why we bought Momentum. So make it as easy as possible, close as many loophole or any gaps as possible, and where you're capturing those conversations. Again, could be to go back to my point earlier about talking about to customers around the world who are not necessarily in Silicon Valley, where they're on the street with their customer, or they're going and visiting a farm and selling, machinery or services to a farmer in New Zealand or Australia, or they're a manufacturer, they sell equipment to manufacturers and they're on the plant shop floor. You got to capture those conversations too.
Mhm.
So we set the bar high. We want to get basically 100% of them, and then associate that with your revenue objects. So your ground truth of how you go to market, which has stood the test of time for a few decades, right? Accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, those kind of thing, campaigns. Associate this context with those things. And then most importantly, then when you've done that, create reusable insights or fragments of the co-founder of Momentum calls these memory fragments, so that you can efficiently drive analytics, you can drive a sales workflow. And of course, you can power an agent without saying, every time I need to go and pass the LLM, I don't know, 50 historical conversations or 5,000 emails back and forth. We kind of parsed that, we captured it, we parsed it, we associated with the things you care about, which is, again, is that account or that deal I'm working or that potential customer, and then inform the agent with that. So that foundational layer, to go back to your question, is absolutely critical. For many organizations, I would say Data 360 its goal is to unlock your more typically structured but also unstructured third-party data that you don't want to sort of force into the CRM.
Mhm.
So if you're running a Snowflake, or if you're running a Databricks or a Redshift or something like that for your product telemetry data, or your shipments information, or your invoicing, and you have an enterprise data warehouse strategy there, then I would totally leverage that. I don't generally see it as being the number one thing that you needed to inform a sales workflow, but you often do need it. So I'd advocate for not a boil the ocean strategy where you think you have to have that all in place initially in day one. I don't think you do. But if you have large amount of that deeply transactional data, it's not really what the CRM's for, and it's exactly what Data 360 is for, is to activate it from wherever you choose to store and manage that data.
Mhm.
Usually the two biggest challenges I tend to see at companies I work with, and Andy, you might have the same experience, it's the garbage in, garbage out. So the challenge with CRM is if you run most people's CRM data into an LLM, it's just going to be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. There's nothing there, right? Most, there's just not enough real meat or content because it all has to be manually inputted. So the concept of momentum and of making sure that we're grabbing
Yep.
the unstructured data and gritting the context, that makes perfect sense as far as the key strategy, because the CRM is only as good as the data that you provide it. So helping that data in, see, I think to me this is like just
Totally agree.
now a standard checkbox of not the capability to do it, because there was always a challenge of how do you get data to the right opportunity, but it's a critical component that now has to be standard. Like it's just your CRM data using structured input, where you look at your win-loss data at the end of every transaction and you're like, it's not telling me anything. We lost because a delay or no decision or no, but you don't really know. And so it becomes you're sorely reducing the value that the CRM produces. The second one, which is kind of what we were talking about around 360, is where is the one place that people are going to go for information about your customers? And is that in Salesforce? So you have these other data repositories. How do you then take those other components and push them back into a single interface? If it is headless, again, it's tough to do this largely, without an interface for reps or individuals to interact with. But those seem to me like the biggest challenges, which is getting data in and then using Salesforce. If it is people are going to be there every day, how do you get as much information in front of them in a single UI as possible?
Yeah, and maybe I'll take that one second, but just to reinforce what you were saying first, it's exactly what Momentum had proven out to be the most important critical thing to take on first, which was auto updating the CRM. You've probably seen this, right? We have this tendency to bloat those hero objects with many, many, many fields that are useful at some point in time, and then it's extremely hard to get the organization to continue devoting time to updating data when it's maybe not really useful for them. And it could be in the future, and it was at some point for a marketer or a revenue leader or an ops person, but it's not really for the seller in their next step related to the deal. So the goal here is that the CRM becomes much more ambient. And again, momentum has proved this, that you just go auto update. It's auto run. So if you are trapping all those conversations and you process them in the right way, you go and autofill the CRM. And what we've done with the agent layer on top of that is say you can define kind of a companion agent, which is looking across the deals, which are now auto-filled. So you take away that burden on the rep of like, please go in and do your CRM hygiene on Friday, which no one likes, or on Sunday before the Monday forecast call, make sure your ducks in a row so you don't get yelled at, which is bad for both worlds because you don't have a strategic conversation about your deals and where you can win and the barriers you need to knock down or where people can invest or problem solving. You just have a conversation about, well, why are the next steps updated? So that's not high value, right? That should be done automatically. That's happening today. The companion agent is zooming out and saying, I'm going to look over all of my inventory of deals for this rep, for this seller, for this account manager, and help them make sure those deals are moving. Are they putting their energy on the right things? Do they follow up on those next steps that were mentioned in that meeting? Do those next steps actually get captured in the first place? Is this thing staged correctly? And if you do these things, then to your garbage in, garbage out point, then everything you've done with reporting and analytics starts to get a little bit better. And appreciating, are the deals staged correctly? Are the forecast categories actually right? Then we can run a more precise go-to-market if we do have the right data in. So, but I think this isn't a sort of big data quality project. I think it's a thing you take on now as regardless of where you are, and you try and look forward and say, we're going to capture as much of this possible. We're going to have the CRM updated. We're going to take that burden away from the sellers. And then we can layer on interesting things, including analytics and agents downstream. So that's number one. The second thing you're talking about is what's the seller experience. And I do think headless is really interesting here because with combining headless with agents that can go and federate and do work in different places, you can ask super interesting questions that aren't bound to the system of record that you're sort of abstracted from the system of record that you might be looking at. And so if I was saying my experience here is with Slack, but equally it could be in Teams or somewhere else, where I'm asking business questions. The sellers and revenue leaders ask these questions all the time, and they shouldn't be constrained by, oh, well, you really need to go and run a Snowflake query in order to do that. Or you need to go and look at the number of case escalations related to this customer. Did you know that it was a red account? Or you thought it was a red account? Actually, no, it's been resolved. Everyone's happy. It's great. Maybe it's time to re-engage here. As you're asking those kinds of questions, you can federate that work out and go and pull together. So I think it's extremely exciting to decouple from the system of record. And we just believe that we have a very important one in the overall go-to-market context, not necessarily that it's everything. As I said earlier, I don't think you have to try and jam every piece of data in there into CRM.
One thing I've been doing, I've been building CRMs for non like SaaS businesses lately. And one thing I've learned with AI over the last 5 to 6 months is I'm ripping out most of my structured fields and I'm going
Okay.
unstructured wherever I can. Like
Mm.
Noah talked on the one, right? Which is lost reasons if you have to pick something and you have to change the pick list to be able to do it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the function of a person, or geolocation, which is not it's not an MSA, but it's a geolocation. There's like so many different ways where I'm just fundamentally realizing that AI is better with unstructured fields versus structured, and Salesforce is still a structured field world. I guess the question I have is, you're starting to see this next gen of CRM 2.0s come on out that are built more AI natively, and then they're putting the call recording and the forecasting right all in, versus
Mm-hmm.
what you guys have done is a really good job of bolting it on, but to a CRM that maybe is a little bit pre-AI that you're starting to backfill pieces. I'm curious, like, do you see limitations in that approach that will, or are you guys discovering those kind of like I am, which is like, oh, I see that field's not working as well that way. I guess I'm starting to see more and more people innovate on field types and the actual data in the fields and how it's structured in an AI world. So it was a very badly asked question, but
No, I get.
yeah.
I know roughly what you mean, and I think it's the combination. Even going back into my analytics days, we really we wanted to be able to ask a fairly structured human sounding question that could operate on very unstructured, not categorized data, and that was a hard problem. And search-based analytics started to help address that. Vector search helped address that. That's one of the reasons why Data 360, or formerly Data Cloud, is important to us, is that we need a place to be able to either store an index or go and call out to external systems in order to not try and jam everything into that square box. And I agree with you. Did you maintain the pick list values? And probably the most obvious example for this would be the competitor field. Who was the competitor on the deal? And was there any incentive, or maybe there were incentives for the seller to do something inaccurate in that? Maybe it was, well, it's really complicated. They've got a bit of this, they're doing some homegrown that, they're considering a third party that isn't in the list. What do I do?
Oh yeah, I remember those
And
Slack messages from reps saying this one that we've lost 2, 3 times in Europe is not on the list. Like, how do I handle that?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you can ask that question of your agent that has access to all the historical conversation data. And I would argue that, to your point about how far can we go on that trajectory, there are limits with context windows, and there are costs associated with taking a sort of naive approach of throwing everything at the LLM, which is doable but kind of lazy, and I think very expensive. It certainly is right now. So that's what I was alluding to earlier on. If you generate a series of insights that are not curated, they're just discovered from your conversations, your many dozens, thousands of sales conversations over time, then you can answer that question. And I think that's super exciting. And then if you put a semantic layer on top of it, then you can do that in a more consistent fashion, because you will have some non-determinism, right, in how an LLM responds. And I think the semantic layer can help where you want some level of consistency over, especially over definitions of things like KPIs. I don't think that's gone away. There are very subtle differences between things that we put into systems, and in the semantic layer, you can sort of create the corporate standard version of that. I know this sounds old school, but I think it's actually important right now, because it does underpin a natural language question, and it reduces the burden on saying, how well is the LLM going to reason over that question? If you have a semantic layer, you can kind of tip it in the right direction. So I would connect those two things. So yes, I think, Andy, it's a great insight. I think that the many dozens of unused structured fields that really weren't helping anyone are probably just they're not really necessary. At the same time, it's way easier just to autocomplete them now with momentum and with the self-driving CRM kind of updating itself based on conversation. So you don't have the burden problem anymore, but you're right, you do have the sort of definition and list of available values and all that stuff. You have to work through that piece.
Salesforce has always been, I think Salesforce's value early on was always like, we're going to create 70% of probably what you really need, but it's going to be just enough. Back when I was a Salesforce customer, I think in 2002, to the chagrin of the Siebel rep that had just assumed that we were going to buy. But it was just ease of use. And I think the challenge was it's the end user experience was always like, it's not quite enough. And right now, this is leading to a build versus buy question, but it seems with the acquisitions of Momentum and Qualified that Salesforce is now trying to be much more prescriptive to the workflows and the processes above and beyond the CRM with the individual users and teams. And I'm curious, because right now companies without a Momentum might be trying to build that themselves. Similarly, all these processes. So it seems like you can either go build something, or now you can go buy it and it's attached to a platform and it's already pre-integrated. And so if you're thinking about a single point solution versus a minor platform versus if you already have Salesforce, it's another bolt-on. The challenge is going to be, I think, from the mindset of, am I going to trust Salesforce for this very pointed need that I have? Am I going to go buy a very point solution that's still individual, that's going to be more nimble and maybe more dynamic, or that could potentially go out of business? Or am I just going to go build this out myself? What are you seeing from your customers today? And maybe the subsequent question beyond that is, what other areas are you hearing from your customer base that Salesforce doesn't yet have a part of the platform for, that may be, teeing up a future acquisition, or an area that's like, I mean, everything you mentioned, you said it's all old school. It's the same fundamental problems that have been around since the beginning of CRM. So it's just now, I think it's interesting that we can solve them in a very high productive and efficient way.
Yeah, there's a lot there, Noah. I think if you look at the acquisition history, you can read between the lines a little bit there and see where the Qualified is a really good example of that, where they've done a phenomenal job working with the marketer, the CMO, to win the kind of inbound experience, especially on the web, with nurture, qualify, get that lead qualified and in the hands of the right seller, and streamline that process, engage with every single inbound, know the customer better. They've done a really, really good job, and they're not stopping. So I think we see examples of that, where having the very specific focus on inbound, in that case, with a web agent, that focus really yielded results. And I think they're the clear leader, and we chose to acquire them. And I think that was a fantastic move, because it complements everything else we do. I think there are other cases where, if you move, say, let's take that example, and you move a bit further down the funnel, and you get to the point where you're, say, onboarding a new customer, or maybe you're cross-selling a new use case into an existing account, and you have a sort of workflow you want to drive there. You can scale that now with an agent, but it's going to be way more specific to your business than a niche vendor could tackle, right? I don't think it's super generalizable. So in that instance, you'd want more platform orientation, where you can say, I want to run an outbound engagement, bidirectional engagement, over email and over SMS and maybe over WhatsApp with this customer, where I want to define it and control it. And that, I think that gets hard to do if you're a specialist vendor, because your market becomes much smaller if you do something super niche. So I'm thinking about examples of, I don't know, I'm onboarding a merchant who's my customer, and I have a specific workflow for a given product line, in terms of how I onboard them, and I want to make that as efficient as possible. And I can't scale it today with human resources, but I could with an agent. Then I want more platform orientation. So I think I'm not trying to dodge a question. I think it's a bit of both. I see there's always an extremely rigorous debate internally about how you optimize for ease of deployment and speed to kind of use case and value, in which case you go more opinionated, make choices for the customer, make it simpler, and you turn stuff on. And I think there are many use cases which fit that category. A good example that we're working on right now is pipeline management, right? It's that agent I talked about earlier on that's looking at your inventory of deals. If you're selling via deals, it's a pretty good thing to do, right? Because your RVP in a historical mode would be trying to do that, right? Do inspection, keep track of everything. Are my sellers doing the follow-ups? Have they staged these deals right? Is the forecast category accurate? What's my judgment? All that stuff. You want to just do that. It's low penalty to turn it on and let the customer run with it and then customize it. So I think there are use cases like that where we're focused on making it as simple and as opinionated as possible to get you up and running. I also think that depends a little bit on the target audience, who you're talking to. Smaller company, fewer resources, less hands-on expertise. They're going to want to, that will work for them. Larger, sophisticated enterprise that's got a whole practice around this sort of different situation, and they want maybe more fine-grained control. So, in some ways, we're trying to handle both of these things at the same time, which is always a good challenge. But the orientation focus is towards the former, which is to say, be faster to market, be simpler, and try and drive customer value quickly, and then move on to the next use case. And obviously, I think it aligns with where the world is going, which is, I'm not sure the longevity of every use case is great.
I love it where you can just hey, do you want to try this, turn it on, you want to try this, turn it on, you want to try this, turn it on. Just allows you the flexibility and the value. I mean, I think Salesforce is now becoming back into conversation around as a viable alternative to some other products out there. And always had the capability, but it was whether or not the organization was really going to focus in that front and be front and center in those conversations. So I think the qualified, and we use it internally, so full disclosure there. But the other things like momentum and so on, I think are super interesting to now be like, okay, how do I best leverage my current investment?
Phil, you mentioned Slack early. I mean, I was a huge champion of Troops before Salesforce bought it years ago, right? Which was the idea of just like being able to trigger things off of Salesforce, pump them into Slack. They bought it, they kind of killed it. But I think the fundamental challenge I struggle with Slack as a UX for reps is I can push things in, but I can't take things back out very easily, right? And so if you're saying you're a CSM and I want to be able to tell you what are the top 3 customers to pay attention to at risk, or you're an AE in your deals, I think what I had noticed on Slack when the Troops guys were doing it and when they sold to Salesforce was reps would very quickly tune out Slack. I feel like Slack is a very good interface for people to query, say, hey, I have a question. Can I ask it that? But I struggle with it for like the dashboard of where to go to do stuff. How do you guys think about Slack as the interface for reps? Because in the end, if it's not Salesforce and it's headless, where does that UX layer live for reps over time? Because I struggle with Slack being the UX layer because there's limited ability to customize it, limited ability to like pull things in. It's kind of like it's kind of a feed. And so I'd love to get your take on.
I can resonate with that from maybe 6 months, 9 months ago. Not today, because the way that the CRM is integrated into Slack has completely changed. So as a system of work, which is the goal of Slack, then it's got to be bidirectional. And so we've done that in sales. If you look at recent announcement on Agentforce Sales for Slack, you're having a bidirectional conversation with the CRM in Slack. So things are yet in Troops mode, what you were talking about, things can be proactively pushed to you. So you're missing on your methodology on this deal, and you have the next steps that are 2 weeks out of date. You might want to bring those to the attention of the seller. And I think you've got to be careful about how you do that so that it's not noise. On that point, Slack is doing a really good job actually with the today experience of exposing the most important things for me to focus on. And that's horizontal, not just sales. It's for anyone using Slack because it's a noisy world. So I think they're sort of mitigating that piece anyway. But I do think as an implementer, you've got to be very careful and intentional about how much you push, because you could, I don't know. I'm not sure about you, but I've set up email notifications on things in the past where I just get too much noise and I tune it out. And I've seen that same behavior.
It happens every time.
Seen that same behavior.
I think that's the problem with Slack is it's time based. Even if you get better at the bidirectional, right? Like, hey, those things, but Slack is still a feed based thing, and so I feel like unless
I think it's shifting though.
Yeah.
I think if you look at the today experience, if you may not have seen it yet, but it's trying to curate what matters for me, including what relates to my calendar, what are the important things I haven't taken care of. It summarizes those things up, and then it pulls Slackbot into that dialogue. So it's not just here's a notification because we've sent you 500 notifications and you need to take care of this thing. It's an agent on top of that saying, how do you want me to interact with it? So it pulls the user into a sort of more agentic workflow on top of what is happening in the business. But then to my earlier point, it's bidirectional with a CRM. So I can go and do the most basic things like update my CRM if I want to, if that's not happening automatically. But I can also invoke work. So an example might be, it's connected to my calendar. It knows I'm meeting with Noah and Andy in an hour. It's going to suggest preparation for that. And then when I get into a dialogue with, and then I'm not just querying, I'm generating a canvas, which is a sort of living document for my team around how we're going to, have that meeting with Noah and Andy, or what our account strategy is. So now I've suddenly got the multiplayer experience happening. I'm working with it, but I want to share this with the channel and get everyone else's input, but I've got the basic information pulled together for me. So Slackbot's really good at helping with that. Downstream, I think, if you were making your forecast, I'd expect you to forecast out of Slack. And I'd actually expect the AI to have called the number for you and told you why, and then for you to maybe approve that or maybe override it, but do so in Slack.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen those use cases. I'm seeing people like, was it Dust we had on the other day on the podcast too, where people are using Slack as a primary interface on that. I just think I still struggle with the time-based nature of the Slack experience versus the prioritization-based nature of it. And so maybe that's something, because in the end, like that feed from 4 weeks ago may be actually more important than the thing that I get right now. And so that I think is maybe like a historical limitation of Slack. Hopefully they fix it at some point, because I'm seeing the Slack has the advantage, which is everyone's in it. But companies can flip it's easy because there's lots of integrations into Slack right now, and so it's fairly locked in. But I am starting to see people experiment with, like, how do I give you that canvas that's more prioritization based? So that'll be
I hear you. I think that's a valid point, that you want to avoid recency bias and kind of the top of the feed, or the top, it's like the old top of my email queue got my attention, but it wasn't the most important thing.
bingo.
I do think there's a huge, the sort of trade-off there on the positive side is that it's effectively becoming your corporate memory of what people are talking about and what they're doing.
Yeah.
So in my workflow, literally, I ask Slackbot as my first go-to place. Like, what the hell does that acronym mean? What's going on with this program I haven't heard about? This initiative over in engineering or in another cloud? It's learning. It is sort of the brains of the organization, or it's the corporate memory of the organization, because most of the interaction is happening there. And to your point earlier, most of it is unstructured. It never got codified in a structured database.
Yeah.
It's in a conversation, or maybe it is just in a set of Google Slides or a sheet or maybe a canvas. And Slackbot has, the more you kind of pull it into the conversation, the better access it has to those things. It builds a corporate memory. So I can't describe that very succinctly. They would do a much better job of it than me, but it is the first port of call for sort of what is going on in the business, who's engaged, what has been said, what were the decisions, those kind of things that super hard, right, to do that in a structured way. Say we met and we all aligned and we had a decision. Where is that? That's in the meeting notes, the transcript, and it's probably in the corresponding Slack conversation.
True.
It's probably not ever going to be in a system.
It's kind of like what they've effectively out glean, and Slack is
in some ways.
there. Yeah. What is the best use case, like the most innovative use cases you've seen? Because I think you probably get a unique luxury to sit there and say, what are people building on top of Agentforce now that we should be thinking about or sharing with the folks that we talk to? Like, what is some of the things where you've just kind of your jaws dropped and said, wow, I can do that on top of this now?
Pretty cool stuff around supporting CRO, more strategic workflows. So where you're not just doing a narrow job to be done. And so if you look at our kind of the sales life cycle that we support with Agentforce Sales, there are very consistent jobs in the life cycle of winning and retaining a customer that are, I think, stood the test of time. And those have informed where we're investing in agents. So I wouldn't put them in, Andy, in your category of like, these are incredible, wow things. They will pay their meat and potatoes. They will pay the bills. They will kind of go prospect, find the right people to engage with, help with that engagement, scale it, help you actually execute your sales methodology, keep deals on track, forecast more accurately, yada yada yada, quote accurately, take friction out of the transacting process as you quote and bill and all that stuff. So those are all building on known workflows. I think there are two things that are interesting. Number one is, to your question, number one is zooming out for that and saying, how does a revenue leader interact with it, where they've got different questions every 2 hours. And there you want a really multi-purpose thing that can act very strategically, but can also then zoom in tactically and say, I'm going to focus on this deal, or this deal's going south and I need to engage, or I need to invoke my network, or I've got too few human resources in this area and we're not, we're generating pipeline with agents, but we're not prosecuting it properly. So I think that's really interesting. I'm seeing some revenue leaders do that, which I think is very cool, very creative, pushing the boundaries of what the reasoning layers can handle.
Yep.
And then I think where it's going, and I'd say is a bit of a kind of a pitch for come to Dreamforce to hear more, but is how do you orchestrate a revenue outcome with agents without having to create all of the logic and decisioning for a human? So how do you say, if I've got an outcome of like, I want to accelerate, or basically I want to hit my number, or I want to maximize retention in this part of the business, delegating that work to an agent where it's going to string together probably work of a bunch of different sub agents, that is pretty exciting. Because I think that ratchets up the scale opportunity that you have with agents, and it's more directly linked to the business outcome. So today you might have, well, we're driving better top of funnel and we're working every inbound lead. We're prospecting at a better scale. And we're targeting geographies or markets or segments that we couldn't afford to target before, and that we know there's some revenue potential there, but we couldn't afford to target them. Now we can afford to target them, which I think is a really interesting dynamic, because it changes your whole economics of your go-to-market organization. So I think that's super interesting. But the next level is going to be like the kind of open claw for the seller of go do all this type of work automatically for me, and see how far we can get. So I think that's where it's going.
Do you have, so I'm curious on the massive ecosystem of Salesforce admin, does the agent builder become the Salesforce admin of the future? Is that the tap in? I haven't been to a trailhead in years, but is that like, seems to be a natural resource of folks that are super passionate. They have the Salesforce tattoos and brands to prove it. Like that's a great group of folks to then evolve into this next sort of evolution of go-to-market builder, engineer / whatever.
Yeah, I think they have to think in less constrained ways. Yeah. And there are layers of agents. So even in their world, right? If I want having the agent, there's a Cody agent, right? So if you're doing setup and you're configuring, and I forgot to do the permission set license assignment, you wouldn't forget that because it did it for you. And in fact, it's all exposed with the headless piece. We talked earlier about headless for the seller persona and where they engage with the CRM and how, but it also applies to the sales ops and the builder. So I'll give you an example. If you're trying to configure, we'll go back to pipeline management as an agent. How do I configure that and change it and adapt it over time? Oh, wow, I can ask Claude to do it. So literally you build a skill, and it could be Cody inside into native Agentforce stack, or it could be I run on Claude, I use Claude Code. I need a skill that knows how to interact with that. And that's remarkable because it's going to do the job faster and with fewer errors.
We need a skill that's inherent in every Salesforce instance, right? When you install, as early companies start to customize the hell out of Salesforce in the wrong way, it just puts up a X. It tells you no, like the aggravation you everybody. You just no, don't do that. We're not going to allow you.
No
I'm all in
multi-select
on
pick
whatever
lists,
that
no
is,
matter what,
or
right?
whatever that
Yeah.
is.
I think it's really, it's one of those things that are sort of layers of metadata which we have in the stack, which are powerful but scary. And I think they've driven some of the complexity of configuring and maintaining and customizing. They make it very powerful, but they also make it hard to use. And that is brilliant for agents because they can consume all that stuff, right? They've read all the documentation. They can query all the APIs. The more sort of programmatic API exposure you have, the better. And they hoover it up. So it's very exciting that is, I think. So you can, bring it back to a go-to-market world, you can adapt and fine-tune your go-to-market more quicker and easier, right? So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, I
Yes,
feel we're about to hit the
exactly.
top of the hour.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming by and stopping by and doing this. I know we've been trying to schedule for a while, but I really appreciate it. We've known each other for a good part of a decade, so I really appreciate you stopping by and
course.
doing this. And all the best. Thank you.
It's been great, Noah.